Right. And I'm ready when you are.
Okay. Do you feel that womanism is not an organic form of women loving women to their own liberation?
I know I heard the question, but say it again, please.
Okay.
Women, what do you mean, women loving women to their own liberation? What do you mean by that?
Well, like women loving other, like instead of hating other women or behaving towards them as though they are their competition, they look at other women as their sister, like in a form of sisterhood to their own liberation.
Okay, so give me the question again.
Okay. Do you feel that womanism is not an organic form of sisterhood for their own liberation?
That wasn't the question.
Okay,
It was women loving women. Okay. Do I feel that womanism is not an organic form of women loving women to their own liberation? Now, you know, I think that that's like way over the everything. Yeah, because I'm going to always think that, you know, womanism, feminism, another ism.
All together.
Yeah, yeah. It isn't that I lump them all together. I get. It's that blessed curse. I get it. Because I'm intelligent enough to get it, but the variations are so minute that they're not helpful. I don't think womanism is. You can't. Of course, it's not organic. It's no more organic than feminism is organic, or sexism is organic, or any other ism. None of the isms are organic. Womanhood. That's organic. A brilliant thought. You know, let's try that. Let's just try actually being women. Let's try that. Let's just get that part down packed. As far as loving other women to their own liberation, to say that in the context of not seeing one another as competition or not being negative towards each other, I think your womanhood is the only place you can do those things in. Because only from a place of womanhood can you actually set a standard for what it is and is not. Someone has to be a standard bearer here. And there's some shit we do need to say to each other that isn't pleasant. Some forms of loving each other won't be warm, fuzzy, and harmonious. You know, I do think it's not necessarily a brother's place to check a woman. I do think that. I don't think men can cultivate women. I do think that. But I don't think that it's sisterhood to not check sisters. I think the only people who can check sisters is other sisters. I mean, them are the people who should be checking sisters. But you can only do that, you see, if your womanhood is intact. If your own womanhood is not intact, what are you going to say? You know, if your children are eating Kool-Aid sandwiches, the fuck are you going to say to a sister about feeding her children McDonald's? You get what I'm saying? So, you know, I really don't subscribe to the whole idea of womanism or feminism or cannivism or diduism or don't you dareism or who the fuck are you ism? You know, it's just so all these isms and nobody's just tried being a woman. Like, actually try to identify what it means to be a woman. And while we're dragging all these isms out of closets and out of drawers and dusting off, you know, all this shit, what does it mean to be a woman? And if you don't have a real idea of what that is, then that's why you start theorizing about all this extra bullshit. You know, you want to identify the DNA and the, you know, you want to swab everything and catalog everything. And no, womanhood is a lot simpler than that, but it isn't easy to do.
How does a black woman effectively free herself from Stockholm Syndrome?
Give herself permission to stop needing other people's permission. We give birth to everybody. There is no authority anywhere in the community higher than woman, because everybody comes through us. So stop needing other people's permission. Stop needing their acceptance. Stop needing their co-signing. You know, just recognize that anything that you feel like our men don't have or do goes right back to what you decide it's okay for them to not have or do. A lot of times, you know, we think we can love them to death and that that'll give them life. And that's not it. You can't sacrifice yourself enough to make a man out of an underdeveloped male. That's not how it works. So he's not going to get taller because you stay on your knees. You know, you can't hunch your shoulders over enough. You can't quite squat down low enough. You can't humble yourself enough. You know, all the bullshit you're going to learn in religion. You can't do any of that shit enough for them to feel compensated for what has been done to them through this racist system. But what you can do is you can grow them enough. You can set a standard and you can identify that some of them are qualified and some of them simply aren't. And stop procreating with the ones who aren't.
If I may add on to that, in a lot of instances, the reason why a black woman may find herself in an abusive relationship where Stockholm Syndrome is present is because she comes from an abusive household, and so she gets used to loving her oppressor, who is her parent.
But it doesn't even have to go as far as an abusive relationship. Stockholm Syndrome is something that can be broadly applied. You know, we're tolerant of generalized bullshit from our brothers. We tolerate a lot of things out of them because we feel like if we're tolerant of it, they'll feel better about themselves. You know, black women, we have a real craft for taking shit. You know, we learn to keep family secrets. It's not just, are you being battered? That's the far end of the spectrum. The Stockholm Syndrome starts far sooner and is far broader than just, is he slapping you? Or are you in a relationship with someone who is demeaning you? Or are you being physically or emotionally abused or financially deprived? Or, you know, it starts far sooner than that. And the fact that you are willing to live in an abusive relationship is because you've been cultivated and groomed for that relationship by your first abusers. Rarely is a woman first ever abused by a person she's sleeping with. She's only willing to be with a person in an intimate relationship who is abusing her because she's familiar with that dance. She knows what that looks like. She knows what that means. Oh, some kind of way. She is familiar with it being her fault. It was her fault when she was a child. It was her fault, you know, when she was in middle school. It was her fault when she was in college. It was her fault. It was always her fault. She was groomed to understand that it was her fault. But what women aren't taught is it's her responsibility. What are women's responsibilities? We're always taught something's our fault, but we never start dealing with what is our responsibility. You understand the difference that I'm saying there? Because if we took more responsibility, then we would feel accountable. Like I feel accountable to not just charge my daughter with a responsibility, but to empower my daughter with an authority. Because now I'm expecting her to be a gatekeeper. I'm expecting her to govern something. I'm expecting her to decide what will and will not live in her queendom. What is and is not okay for her life. Because now I've given her responsibility. That gives her an authority. That gives her a control. That gives her her rights. That gives her the chance to take care of and accommodate and make sure everybody who's in her care is accommodated. But if I just tell her something's her fault, then it just lays a weight and burden on her shoulders. And before you know it, those curled shoulders start by the time she's 13, 14, 15. And she's, you know, still trying to be a good girl when she's 40. Trying to prove her worth to someone because she never knew that they didn't have the authority to measure her to begin with.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, jumping a little bit in subjects. Do you think it's possible for the human race to get over the impulsive inclination of dominance and destruction?
I don't think that's an issue of the human race. I think that's a patriarchal issue. And I think that will only be resolved with the resurgence of matriarchy as a value system. You know, control and dominance, those aren't humane spirits. The need for them isn't born out of something fair or just or even concerned. It's born out of selfishness, greed.
Fear?
Which would still be rooted in selfishness. You know, fear of being taken out of a position or fear of being controlled. You know, you could throw it in there, but it's still going to come out of selfishness. I want all for me and less for you, or I'm going to feel like it's going to take something from me when there's nothing you can do to take anything from me. Nothing. You can't have enough to keep me from having what I'm worth. But a person who knows that feels no need to control you. That's a matriarchal value system. When sometimes you hear me say, I won't be owned. I'm a free woman. I will not be owned. I've given birth to free children. I got them to their adulthood free. Debt free and free. What they chose to do with it after that was on them. But I'm a free woman. I gave birth to free children, and I will not be owned. Nor do I desire to own. I have no need to control what you do. And you will not control what I do. I don't have to ask you not to control me or not to try to control me. I don't have to ask you not to own me. You simply will not own me. In order for you to control me, there need be some portion of that is my cooperation.
Yes.
So when you hear me say things like slavery will end when the slave stops participating, rules are for slaves. And that applies to everything. Laws, ideology, theology, rules are for slaves. And everybody who submits to them is enslaved to someone or something. Now, rules are very different than customs, very different than traditions. But the moment you start trying to confine me, and I'm no longer at liberty to agree for the sake of agreeing or participating by choice, be it I'm just simply in the mood or not, the moment that's no longer the case, then we're no longer relating. Now we're in a transaction. And that's not going to work for me.
Okay. I like that. Thank you.
Sure.
Okay. Last question is, can a black woman have multiple sex partners without forming soul ties?
Yes. That's the short answer. Yes.
Okay.
Just like anybody can. That may not be what she desires for herself, but is it possible? Yes. Every sexual act is not some higher, euphoric, spiritual, esoteric something or another to take you to the next,
Yeah.
Sometimes the buildup was more than you thought it was going to be, and then it was like, what? So, of course that's possible. Everything's possible. That doesn't mean you need to be a dumping ground for every passerby's pleasure spots either. But, whatever floats your boat. It's one of those things that it's like me trying to sell you a ticket to heaven. If you limit the number of orgasms you have in your life, you stand a really good chance of having a good seat at the head table near Jesus. The beautiful thing is they're regenerative. You can have as many as you want. You're going to have more.
Yeah.
You understand what I'm saying? So good news. You don't have to be celibate and mean and unbearable. You don't have to be. But at the same time, it's where you are in life. that has something to do with it.
Mm-hmm.
What your life experiences have been. You know, I don't personally have a problem with hoes. I just don't want to pretend that ain't what you're doing.
Yeah.
I'm okay if that's what you choose to do. We're just not going to pretend you're not doing it. We're not going to pretend this ain't hoeing.
Yeah.
Let's be clear. But if that's your thing, just own that that's your thing.
Mm-hmm.
Because in all actuality, who's in the position to say something about it? What is anybody going to say? We're not voting on it.
Yeah.
It's really not up for discussion. So, you know, can you? Of course. And a lot of women, unfortunately, even when they're not trying to, do. So that's another thing. A lot of women have multiple partners because they're looking for something that they're never going to find because they didn't find it within themselves first.
Privilege, sort of.
It's definitely got privilege in it. But I doubt if you could poll, honestly, 80-year-old black women that they would say one of the things they wished is that they had had far fewer sex partners or far less sex. I've never heard an older woman tell me that.
Mm-hmm.
There's just that one less orgasm I wish I'd had. I just never heard that. Never heard that. Women genuinely want to be desired and loved, and they want that abundantly. They genuinely want it abundantly. Mm-hmm. So nobody's trying to rationalize it. And usually those who buy into some type of rationaling, you know, if we can rationalize, just ration the sex. Women who buy into that, and I'm not talking about virtues, so don't get me wrong.
Okay.
Because I think I'm a pretty virtuous person. I think I'm a very virtuous person, actually.
Okay.
But I'm not talking about virtues. I'm just talking about giving yourself permission to be pleased, not this used, utilitarian, disposable, tossed aside entity, this object of sex, like a prop. You get what I'm saying? But genuinely, affectionately loved and passionately tended to, absolutely. Have it abundantly. I'm absolutely adamantly opposed to celibacy for the sake of celibacy. I think if you just genuinely are not in a partnership or relationship or something for a reason, go with that. But just for the sake of, you know, saving yourself for Jesus or fixing yourself for whoever the fuck, no. No. It doesn't work that way. And I'm just telling you genuinely, no. Mm. And I wish more women older than me, earlier than me, had been bold enough to say those things to us when we were your age.
Yeah.
There's so much stuff we wouldn't have done, but they did the best thing they could, which was tolerate it, because if they wanted to put a stop to it, they could have. Because in all actuality, this whole timeout, you know, cracker style parenting is new. Mm-hmm. When I was coming up, we got our asses beat. You was not gonna just, you know, generally speaking, you weren't doing anything your parents didn't want you to do. Mm-hmm. So if it was something she wanted your ass to stop doing, it was beat out of you. It wasn't gonna happen. You weren't gonna do that until you had an address where your mail came to it and you were paying the bills. And that's how you understood. So anything that the generations before us didn't really want us doing, they stopped us from doing. Mm-hmm. So when we started going through these generations of sexual rebellion, it was tolerated because these women had been largely repressed, like generalized repressed. Of course you have your exceptions to the rules, like your mom Mabley's, and who I think was a trailblazer of sexual liberation. And not because of her sexuality, but just because of her who gives a shit mentality, which you have to appreciate. You know, I just wish they could have verbalized it sooner, but I understand that it just wasn't a popular thing to do. Mm-hmm. You know, I'm of an era where I verbalize things freely with, to, and in front of, and for my children's sake. But I only have that freedom because it was afforded me by my parents, by the women who came before me. They tolerated my mouth when I was a child. They tolerated me saying what was on my mind, and you understand what I'm saying? doing what I preferred to do. Yeah, if there was a punishment going to come, as long as I was willing to pay the price, I could do what I wanted to do. And that's what groomed me into being able to be a free woman. I wasn't reared to be owned. And that comes with just what you're talking about. You know, it does come from generation to generation. There's a liberation that has to happen there.